Dan Bongino dismantled Maxine Waters with a single query, ensuring her career was finished. The atmosphere inside the House Judiciary Committee chamber felt dense, carrying the smell of polish and the electric buzz of numerous high-definition broadcast setups. Outdoors, the rain in March coated the city avenues in a slick gray gloss, but indoors, the heat was noticeably increasing. Maxine Waters straightened the collar of her scarlet outfit, a hue so intense it appeared to hum against the dark wood of the podium. She was 75 years of age, a veteran of 30 years in these halls, and she was keenly aware of every camera angle. She sensed the heaviness of the gavel in Chairman Jim Jordan's grip before he even brought it down. The sharp noise reverberated against the tall, vaulted ceilings and the solemn paintings of deceased legislators. Jordan declared the session open with a tone that was professional and concise, as he had done countless times before. However, a unique tension permeated the chamber on this day, a quietness that felt almost predatory. Dan Bongino sat by himself at the designated table, looking nothing like the standard government official found in the Capitol. He lacked the entourage of expensive attorneys or public relations experts, whispering rehearsed evasions into his ear. He sat with a rigid posture, placing a dense folder on the surface before him as if it were an armament. He tweaked the microphone position using a hand that was accustomed to holding a firearm for many years. When he finally spoke, his Queen's dialect was sharp and rough, lacking any apology or refinement. Bongino expressed his gratitude to the chairman, stating he was ready to address any inquiries the panel might possess. Waters did not wait for the official acknowledgement, nor did she allow Jordan to conclude his introductory statement. She moved aggressively toward her microphone, creating a brief screech of audio feedback that caused nearby aides to grimace. She projected her voice to the rear of the room, stating she intended to reclaim her time immediately. She claimed to know the witness and his background, predicting he would attempt to stall like previous appointees. A ripple of mild disorder spread through the chamber, causing a few performative laughs from one side and groans from the other. Waters remained indifferent as she commanded the room with eyes that were piercing and steady behind her spectacles. Jordan recognized the representative from California for 5 minutes, with a voice that sounded tired and all too familiar with the routine. Waters snapped a thank you and donned her glasses with a dramatic gesture while glancing at her papers. She addressed the witness directly, stating she wanted to be precise about his identity and past roles. She listed his history as a radio host and news contributor, labeling him a sycophant who attacked progressive causes. She noted he had criticized social movements and now inexplicably held a position of power within the Bureau. Leaning forward, she pointed a finger accusingly, asking if the agency under his direction had investigated activists. Bongino remained motionless, having guarded presidents and survived some of the most hazardous environments on Earth. To him, a congressional inquiry was merely a different variety of noise and disturbance. He began to respond with a steady voice, explaining that they investigate federal offenses rather than political beliefs. Waters interrupted with a shrill demand for a yes or no answer, cutting through the hum of the climate control. She insisted it was a straightforward query and asked if he was too occupied shielding his political superiors to answer. Bongino leaned closer to the microphone and promised a simple response with a gravelly texture in his voice. He confirmed they had investigated an organizer in Oakland because the individual allegedly stole millions from a charity. He asked the congresswoman if they should have allowed the theft or if activism granted immunity from fraud charges. Waters dismissed his words with a wave of her hand, calling it a deflection from the standard playbook. She labeled him a mouthpiece and questioned his impartiality, given his history of supporting a man who challenged democracy. This was her usual tactic, which involved making the witness defensive and shifting the focus to race and power. It had been effective against banking executives and secretaries, but Bongino did not adhere to the expected script. He conceded she was correct about one specific point, causing the room to fall into a sudden silence. Reporters paused their transcription, and even the camera shutters appeared to decelerate their rhythmic snapping. He admitted he had been vocal and held opinions, but shifted the topic to credibility and the right to hold power. Waters shouted that she was the one asking questions, but the momentum in the room was clearly turning. The atmosphere grew colder as the smell of polish was overtaken by the metallic scent of electronic equipment. Bongino noted she had represented her district for 32 years, speaking in a slow and measured rhythm. He asked how many days per year she actually resided in that district during that lengthy period. He clarified he meant truly living there, witnessing what her constituents saw, rather than just visiting for campaigns. The expression on her face hardened as she recognized the trap and the nature of the folder on his table. She hissed that she was not required to answer him, and he agreed with a slight, chilly smile. However, he stated the public deserved an answer and yielded his time to address her questions about his fitness. Bongino rose and approached a covered easel that had been positioned near the witness station. The focus of the room shifted, and the squeak of his shoes was the only audible noise. He removed the first cover, revealing a map of the district overlaid with bold red statistics. The data displayed low median income, high homelessness, and significant rates of violent crime in the area. He declared these were her people after decades of her fighting for them before revealing the second image. The photograph showed a multi-million-dollar estate with lush grounds and high-security gates. Bongino stated this was her residence, located in a completely different district, far from the poverty she represented. He accused her of living like royalty while representing the poor, noting she did not even share their zip code. Waters attempted to interrupt with a procedural objection, but her voice failed her as millions watched the contrast. The split screen showed the destitute tents on one side and the opulent mansion on the other. The preliminary phase was finished, and the political execution had officially commenced. Bongino did not pause for a rebuttal as he retrieved a stack of documents from his folder. He held them up to ensure the cameras captured the official government watermarks on the pages. He questioned how a public servant accumulated a net worth of $6 million on a government salary. His voice dropped to a lower grinding tone as he brought up her husband and a specific bank. The color drained from her face, making her appear almost transparent as she shifted awkwardly in her chair. Her chief of staff whispered frantically behind her, but she motioned for him to remain silent. She managed to say the matter was settled and that the ethics committee had cleared her years ago. She claimed this was ancient history and accused him of reaching for non-existent ghosts. Bongino countered that he was looking at the ledger, not ghosts, as he flipped to a new board. This chart was a stark timeline with dates in black ink and specific events highlighted in red. He traced the line to September 2008, noting the financial crisis and her husband's stock in a failing bank. He described the investment as a stone in a well that was about to lose all value. He moved to the next date, where her office arranged an emergency meeting with Treasury officials. He noted this was highly unusual as the department was overwhelmed and ignoring small banks. Waters slammed her hand on the table, shouting that she was assisting a minority-owned business. The sound echoed like a gunshot as she claimed to be saving a pillar of the community. Bongino snapped back that she was saving her husband's portfolio, his accent becoming sharper. He pointed out that 3 weeks later the bank received $12 million in taxpayer funds. He gestured to the gallery, emphasizing that it was their money before flipping to property records. He revealed that between late 2008 and early 2009, she went on a real estate spending spree. While her constituents faced eviction and foreclosure, she purchased properties with cash and minimal financing. She acquired new wealth while the rest of the nation was suffering financially. Camera operators zoomed in close enough to catch a nervous twitch in her eye. The news networks displayed a three-way split screen showing the mansion, the tents, and the stock chart. Bongino leaned over the table, stating that the ethics committee found her grandson acted inappropriately. He noted the staffer took the blame but questioned her claim of ignorance regarding her family's fortune. He asked if she just happened to broker a bailout for the exact bank holding her husband's money. Waters shook as she shuffled her notes, creating a sound like dry leaves in a storm. She called it a hit job and claimed she had dedicated her life to the cause. Bongino interrupted her, saying she had dedicated her life to the hustle in a calm drone. He pointed out that she voted for the interests of banks where her family had investments every time. He stated the pattern remained the same regardless of the year, using the poor as a shield. He sat back down and took a slow, deliberate sip of water in the silent room. He locked eyes with her and addressed her earlier question about his fitness for the job. He declared himself an investigator and stated the evidence suggested she was a franchise rather than a representative. Without waiting for a response, he pulled out Federal Election Commission records marked with bright highlighter. He suggested moving past the banks to discuss the family business and her daughter. Waters gripped the podium tightly, causing her skin to stretch over her knuckles. She began to defend her daughter as a professional consultant, but he cut her off. He stated that between 2006 and 2024, her campaign paid her daughter over $1 million. He emphasized that this money came from donations by people living in the tents shown earlier. He returned to the easel to display a bar graph comparing average district income to the payments. The visual contrast between the small income bar and the massive payment column was striking. He asked the room if paying a family member from campaign funds was illegal. He answered his own question, stating it was technically legal if work was performed, but then questioned the work. He noted that her daughter's consulting fee often consumed a massive percentage of total project costs. He argued that, in the private sector, such a fee would be considered a kickback rather than payment. Waters broke her silence with a shrill voice, accusing him of attacking a black woman's family. She claimed he was trying to criminalize her children's success because he could not defeat her politically. Bongino leaned on the easel and countered that he was highlighting a business model built on poverty. He accused her of preaching about the struggle while using donations to fund a lavish lifestyle. The tension in the room intensified as a subway train vibrated beneath the building. He cited transcripts from other consultants who called the payments extraordinary and unprecedented. They had stated no one receives such fees for mailers unless they share a last name with the candidate. He returned to his seat slowly and took another sip of water, setting the bottle down softly. He told her she calls it representation, but only her family seems to be getting richer. He listed her wealthy relatives and palace while pointing out her constituents were still under tarps. Waters opened her mouth but remained frozen, looking from the cameras to the easel. For the first time in decades, the time had run out for the self-proclaimed Queen of Resistance. Bongino ignored his notes and leaned back in his creaking leather chair, looking directly at her. He recalled her statement that he did not know her district or her people. He admitted he did not live there, but revealed his private investigators had been there for weeks. He clarified that his personal team, paid with his own money, had conducted the surveillance. He pressed a button on his tablet, bringing the screens behind him to high-definition life. The footage was raw and jarring, unlike the sanitized clips usually seen in commercials. It showed a drone sweep over the desperation of the district, revealing rows of blue tarps. Bongino narrated the scene, pointing out the overflowing shopping carts and prematurely aged faces. The camera showed abandoned storefronts with faded lease signs indicating years of neglect. He declared this was the reality of her leadership before the footage cut sharply. The screens filled with lush hedges and palm trees swaying against a clear sky. He identified this as her reality in Hancock Park, protected by a gleaming security gate. He accused her of collecting votes like feudal dues while retreating to a home her constituents could not afford. Waters shouted that this was a stunt and slammed her hand down, leaving the gavel untouched. She accused him of using the suffering of her people as a prop for right-wing media. Bongino raised his voice while maintaining control, stating she was the one using them. He argued she used them as a stepping stone to a mansion not located in their zip code. The room felt stagnant, and the smell of lukewarm coffee drifted through the tense air. He assured her that his investigators did more than fly drones, they walked the streets. He revealed the people knew her face from television but did not know her personally. She yelled that she was in Washington fighting for them as the chair of the committee. Bongino interrupted, cutting her off, to say she was fighting for the bank, holding her husband's stock. He accused her of fighting to keep cash flowing to her daughter's firm while her district suffered. The drone footage focused on a family huddled around a stove on a cracked sidewalk. He whispered that this was her legacy after 32 years of reclaiming her time. He remarked she had reclaimed time from their future to deposit it into her bank account. Waters sat back, appearing diminished against the backdrop of the reality on the screens. The atmosphere was radioactive, and the audience realized they were witnessing a political suicide. The room smelled of ozone and hot plastic as the humidity built up outside. Waters stood up, her red suit contrasting sharply with the dark wood of the room. She gripped the podium until her knuckles turned white, searching the cameras for a familiar rhythm. She knew she was losing the stage, despite being a veteran of theatrical politics. Her voice became a ragged scream as she claimed this was a setup and an abuse of power. She accused him of using the Bureau to harass a sitting member of Congress. Bongino sat with arms crossed and a mask of indifference, stating it was public record. He remarked that it is difficult to intimidate a spreadsheet. Waters shouted that this was racism targeting her because she was a strong black woman. The room went silent as she played the nuclear option that usually ended debates. Journalists froze, and committee members looked at each other, waiting for the fallout. Bongino stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with a low groan. He leaned over the table and warned her not to dare play that card with him. His voice was a low hum, carrying more weight than her shouting as his accent sharpened. He described his working-class upbringing and how his parents worked hard to survive. He listed his history working through college and serving as a police officer and agent. He stepped out, moving toward the podium, causing police officers to shift nervously. He stated he had protected presidents of both parties and investigated corruption on all sides. He declared he did not care about race, gender, or party affiliation. He cut off her interruption by slamming his hand onto the easel next to the photo. He shouted that her black and brown constituents deserved better than a leader who got rich while they suffered. He argued they deserved better than someone who used their struggle to buy real estate elsewhere. He was inches away now, and cameras showed her composure disintegrating like wet paper. He whispered that she should not hide behind identity politics to cover up robbery. He stated that facts and the people in the tents did not care about skin color. The room exploded with applause on one side and chaotic shouting on the other. Through the pandemonium, Bongino stood his ground, staring directly into her eyes. Waters looked at him, and the screen realizing she had no comeback or slogan left. She only had a mansion and a district where most people did not know her face. Jordan shouted that the hearing was in recess, but the damage was already irreversible. The hallway outside was a tunnel of noise and blinding camera flashes. Staffers propelled Waters through the crowd, trying to shield her from the lenses. Reporters shouted questions about the mansion and her resignation as she retreated. The heavy doors of her office slammed shut, creating absolute silence inside. Every television in the suite showed the split screen of the mansion and the tents. Her director whispered that the clip had reached 60 million views. He noted it was trending on all platforms, including the youth demographics and their own base. At the Bureau headquarters, Bongino tossed the folder onto his desk with a final thud. An aide mentioned the media circus and how analysts were struggling to defend the optics. Bongino growled that it was about math, not optics, because you cannot argue with ledgers. He noted she brought a narrative to a gunfight, while he brought the receipts. By evening, the news had reached street level in the district where the filming occurred. The air was thick with the scent of betrayal in the neighborhoods Bongino had highlighted. Community organizers gathered in basements, staring at their phones in disbelief. The race card had been played, but it was trumped by the drone shot of the lawn. A young man in a community center stated they had been voting for a ghost. The media explosion caused a realignment, making the split screen a symbol for political failure. By midnight, the hashtag referencing her 32 years was trending globally. Waters sat in her office, watching her world burn down in high definition. The next morning brought a heat wave to South Los Angeles, making the asphalt shimmer. In a cramped office above a barber shop, Marcus Williams watched the ceiling fan turn. He was a tenant rights organizer with a face carved from the streets he tried to fix. He watched the video on his phone, repeatedly observing the gap between the mansion and tents. The sound of barber shears and sirens provided the soundtrack of the district. His campaign manager mentioned that Waters was calling it a racist hit job. She noted Waters was leaning into her old slogans, hoping they would save her again. Marcus looked at the homeless encampment outside where a mother washed her child. He stated that slogans do not provide housing or explain the mansion purchased on a government salary. He walked to the window, feeling the heat, and noted people were tired of being props. He recalled seeing her briefly years ago at a photo op before she was whisked away. He filed the paperwork by noon and held a live stream in front of a closed store. He introduced himself, stating he was running because the incumbent did not live there. He pointed out she did not shop at the closed market or see the kids studying in the dark. He declared she lived in luxury, while they lived in the reality she helped create. The video acted as a lightning rod for decades of suppressed resentment in the community. Marcus represented the community speaking the language of rent strikes rather than cable news. While Waters scrambled for television spots, Marcus held town halls on cracked basketball courts. In Hancock Park, the air was chilled and scented with expensive flowers. Waters sat in her library listening to the clock as polling numbers began to slide. Her chief of staff argued that Marcus was a nobody and they would crush him with ads. Waters looked at her perfect hedges and corrected him, saying Marcus was a mirror. She admitted she had prevented mirrors in the district for 30 years, offering a window instead. She realized the money would not matter if the people started looking at themselves. Marcus Williams raised $500,000 in small donations by the end of the week. People were buying a way out of a 32-year story rather than just a candidate. The battle was between institutional power and the undeniable reality of the streets. Marcus Williams became the wind turning the spark of the media supernova into a wildfire. The walls of the office building could not block the sound of a crumbling empire. The hallways filled with the scent of damp wool and printers churning out house subpoenas. The morning newspapers hitting her door served as a daily indictment of her legacy. The Ethics Committee room was a sterile vault designed for cold accountability. Maxine Waters sat at the table wearing blue, but looking pallid under the lights. The lead investigator looked at her like a math problem being solved. He stated they were inquiring into her financial disclosures and her husband's portfolio. He slid a document across the table, revealing internal memos that were previously hidden. He focused on a specific morning in 2008 when her office contacted Treasury officials. He noted an email sent to her staff instructing them to open the door for the bank. Waters reached for a glass with a trembling hand as condensation dripped onto the tray. She claimed she was concerned about minority banks and her family's involvement was a coincidence. The investigator countered that coincidence is difficult to defend when it happens repeatedly. He presented records showing her husband invested in another bank just before a tax bill passed. He noted the stock rose significantly, and she subsequently bought a property in the desert. He stated the public saw a hedge fund with a congressional seat rather than a representative. The investigation had expanded to include the mailers and travel expenses. They had interviewed former staffers who described a culture of family enrichment. They described donations as access fees and a representative who never visited her district. Waters realized the resistance inside her own office had been building for a long time. She whispered that this was a political hit job, weaponizing the process. The investigator replied that the poor were the ones who filed the complaints. He revealed they received thousands of letters asking where the money went. Waters walked out into the corridor, feeling the silence like a heavy weight. Her nameplate on the door looked less like a title and more like a target. The heat of the primary in South Los Angeles felt physical and tasted of diesel. Marcus Williams stood on a crate, speaking to a crowd on a cracked sidewalk. He wore jeans and sweat, sweeping his arms toward boarded-up storefronts. He asked if 32 years looked like time reclaimed or time stolen. The crowd of real people leaned in with a dawning anger on their faces. He stated she lives behind gates while their kids play behind fences. He noted she votes for banks that foreclose on their homes while her husband cashes checks. The effect of the hearing had metastasized into a ghost haunting her everywhere. Drones appeared overhead whenever she attempted a staged photo op. In her mansion, the silence was absolute as her manager reviewed the disastrous numbers. The manager noted her never-seen status was polling at 82% in the South. People were angry about the money and the fact that they did not know her. Waters slammed her hand down, claiming to be their voice and champion. The manager countered that they do not live in committee rooms but in a struggling district. He pointed out Marcus was handing out water and talking about receipts, not resistance. Waters looked at the gardener she had never spoken to and ordered a homecoming tour. The tour lasted less than an hour and was a sensory disaster from the start. The crowd smelled of a neighborhood that had seen too many empty promises. She shouted she was back, but a voice asked back from where. The woman listed the mansion and bank meetings, asking where she had been. Waters pivoted to her aggressive pitch, claiming to fight for their rights. A young man held up a phone showing the split screen and asked about her daughter. Waters accused him of being a puppet, but a woman shouted she was a resident. The woman stated she had not seen Waters since the riots and accused her of getting rich. Cameras caught the realization that the race card had no power in this context. The motorcade sped away from the voters who had built her empire. Inside the vehicle, Waters sweated, despite the air conditioning, as polls dropped further. She saw Marcus Williams on the sidewalk, surrounded by people laughing and shaking hands. He looked through the glass, and she realized the Queen was already in exile. By evening on Election Day, the sun set over a district smelling of salt and heat. Marcus sat in a loud community center, while Waters sat in her silent fortress. She watched the screen as the first tallies showed a significant gap in the votes. The gap did not close, and colleagues stopped answering her calls. The dynasty ended by late night with a landslide defeat in the primary. Marcus took the stage in his sweat-stained polo, addressing the roaring crowd. He announced that they had reclaimed their reality after 32 years. He stated that the split screen proved you cannot represent a community while hiding from it. He declared the district was tired of being a prop and was ready to be a home. Waters stood at her window in Hancock Park, looking at the manicured lawn. She realized Bongino had simply held up a mirror that the district finally looked into. The legacy of the split screen became a subject of study in political science. It marked the death of the identity shield and the triumph of reality over rhetoric. Years later, the district looked different, with co-ops replacing closed stores. Marcus Williams still lived in the zip code while the mansion was sold. A new center opened with a simple sign reading, "Our Time," signaling the people were home.